Sarah Brightman's career has been a musical journey, from hit disco singles and show-stopping performances on Broadway to becoming one of today's most celebrated classical singers with more than 180 gold and platinum records in 40 countries. She's also become an advocate for math and science programs, branched out to designing a line of jewelry with Swarovski, and she's returning to the spotlight with an album chronicling today's fast-moving times. I had heard you say that this album, Him, really was a spiritual album for you. Maybe you can elaborate on what was going through your mind as you made this album.
Actually, you know, that's a good question, because a lot of my albums, the themes that go behind them usually are quite personal to me, and they're what I've been going through at that particular time. So a little bit like artists, when you look at art, you're seeing that part of that person's spirit there on the canvas, or however, whether it's installation or whatever it is. So my albums are very much like that. And actually this one came because I'd been training in Russia, and I was part of the Russian space program, and I'd been involved in this for many, many years. And for some particular reasons, I decided to come out of it. It was a family decision and my decision. And when I did, I needed to sort of ground myself and get back to Sarah Brightman, the singer. But I had all sorts of new perspectives from doing this about the world and mortality and all of that. And I noticed coming back into the world, it felt a little bit dystopian. People seemed a bit disturbed. They were uneasy about the future. Loads of things were happening in the world. And I sort of felt that I wanted to do an album that was sort of simple but full of light, full of hope, things that reminded me of when I was younger and singing in my church, things that were familiar. And I wanted to work with lots of heavenly voices, i.e. choirs, because it's interesting. And when you go back in history, and for example in England when they were going through World War II, my great aunts told me when they were alive that actually when they were involved in that time, and that there were the bombs and all the things they went through, there was more music sung in that time at people's pianos, or they sang together in the underground when they were waiting for than ever. And they said it was actually something that really, really uplifted them. There's something about human voices with choirs and that come together, and there's this beautiful human thread. So I made this album called Him, which is choir-based.
And a lot of people talk about timing being everything. That literally is the case with this album, with the song Him.
Yes. Which,
when you first heard it, you loved it, but the timing wasn't right for you.
You're right. It's actually a Barclay James Harvest song that was written way back. And it was my long-time producer back in the 90s that gave me this cassette player, and he said, if we start working together, we have to know that we're on the same wavelength. So I've given you these 20 songs, have a listen. So this cassette, I put in my Chrysler LeBaron I was on Highway 1 actually in Los Angeles going to Carmel, and the first song that came up was a song called Him, Barclay James Harvest, brilliant piece of music, beautiful, and I went, yes, this is the producer I want to work with, this is a perfect song for me, but I didn't sing it until now. So its timing to do with choir was right now. So that's how the song Him came about.
We've had this opportunity to see you at this high level of success, but take us back to the beginning, and when you were auditioning, for example, for Cats initially, what was going through your mind back then?
Actually, I'd run out of money. I'd had a big pop success in the kind of late 70s in the disco era, and I had two hit singles, and suddenly, as always with more superficial music, it stopped. It didn't work anymore, and I thought, well, I really need to find a job. I've been trained as a ballerina, singing, acting, all of these things. What can I do? And an audition came up in a newspaper we had in those days called The Stage. It said anyone that feels they can bring something unusual to this very unusual music by Andrew Lloyd Webber, please come to this audition. So I went to an open audition, and it was I had to go through 9 auditions after that, but it was an incredibly unusual piece because it had people from all directions coming. You had like myself, who was a pop star at the time. You had people from the Royal Shakespeare Company. You had T.S. Eliot's Cats poems. You had Gillian Lynn, the choreographer, and it was experimental. We went on for many, many weeks experimenting and thought there wouldn't even be a show at the end. There was, and I remember standing behind the scenes in these Cats costumes with this sort of like ropey tail, and we were all looking at each other thinking, what on earth are they going to think about this? And we had these punk hairstyles and wigs on, and we went on and we did this, and it was amazing. I remember the audience just rose and they applauded, and they didn't start applauding, and we thought, great, we've got a hit. It was all worth it.
Wow. What's so interesting too about the musical chapter of your life is while you're often interpreting songs, you yourself have said that Andrew Lloyd Webber had you as his muse with Phantom.
Yes.
And I would think that most people who are thinking about being involved with that production today are always thinking, gosh, what would Sarah think of what I'm doing today?
Well, it's funny actually. It's very lovely when I take nieces or whoever to go and see Phantom. I can actually, when I hear the female soprano or the new women coming in to sing that role, I can actually hear the patterns in my voice, and it was written around my voice, which is a very lovely thing because you're part of something that's been there forever. It's a jewel. It's going to go on forever, and I feel very, very privileged because it was that time.
So we hear the passion always in the music. You referenced space. Where does that passion for space come from?
Well, I was a kid in the 60s, and when a lot of us who were interested watched the first man land on the moon on our television sets, we thought we were all going to go. But it changed a lot of us, because we thought, right, there's extraordinary things you can do. I mean, I was brought up in a little market town outside of London. It was called Berkhamsted. And I mean, life was beautiful, life was Eden. We did our education, I did my dancing and music, but there was nothing like that. And it was an extraordinary time, and it was pivotal for me because I started to really work hard and think I can do something special. There are all these wonderful opportunities. So when the opportunity much later on in life came up for me to maybe go in and start testing, first at NASA and then in Russia for this, I went into it seriously, but it was half-hearted as well because I thought, there's no way I'm an artist, there's no way I'm going to pass all these very complicated engineering tests and physical tests and everything. And I started to pass everything, and then it went further and further, and the more involved I got, the more fascinated I was, and I was actually, because of it, able to make a beautiful spacey album called Dream Chaser and do a beautiful spacey tour with amazing space visuals, and it was lovely. I was invited to go and see things like the Hadron Collider, which people normally, apart from people in university doing their masters, whatever, would go and see. So I really got into a lot of the technical details that happened with that.
Wow.
And was able to make something out of it as an artist.
So you really see these flows through your career, everything in
Yes.
some ways blending together. Now on the business side, brands are always probably approaching you, asking about finding ways to team up or partner. With this album, for example, there was a collaboration with Swarovski.
Yes.
How do you know when it's the right fit, when you as an artist are working with a brand on something maybe that's indirectly or directly tied to the work that you're doing?
Well, it was interesting this, because I've actually never sort of worked in this way with a brand particularly, because I've always felt I'm an artist, I sing, and nothing ever really felt right or contrived. It could have been a contrived thing if I'd forced anything. And it was funny because I'd been using Swarovski crystals on the beautiful dresses and runway gowns that I wear in my concerts, really because a lot of my music is very spiritual, and it's kind of, a lot of it is full of light. And actually using the crystals on the costumes not only enhanced the look of them, but it gave an extra dimension, which because they reflect light, and I'm very into light design and get very involved with it. So everything was reflective, and it just gave a very as a visual feast for the audience, because obviously they're there to hear the singing and the music, but that it gave that extra dimension for them visually. And so when this came about, and I was asked if I'd be interested to work with Swarovski on a new line and work with my costumes, I thought, actually, this really fits. And I always think that about branding with artists. It has to be something that really you feel passionate about and you've worked with in some sort of way, so that it makes sense to people.